What's going on, everybody? Alex here from Columbus. Welcome back to another video, and welcome to a little bit of a thread response. I don't jump on threads nearly as much as I should, but you know what? This is where my boy, my man's Morton Astad, he started a thread that is about non-debut self-titled albums. Now I have 10 records I will show, so the criteria here are show some records, some albums, whatever, that are self-titled, but not the debut. I will say right off the bat, no Metallica and no Beatles. I do have both those records. They're amazing. They're great. But I went a little bit different. So I will jump right in and start showing some records. What's interesting here is like some of these are, very early on in the career where it's sort of like, oh, it's still early. Our debut wasn't called this, but like, here's our chance to still make the name for ourselves. And other ones are latter career records that I always wonder, in like the conference room, how people think of the name. They're like late in their career, they're in their 50s, no one cares about them anymore. They got these songs and they're like, what do we call the record, man? And everybody's lazy and they don't know and they don't have anything clever. And they're like, what if we call it ourselves, bro? And you're like, oh, Jesus, people. Anyway, one of the earliest and great ones that, of course, is worth talking about is the self-titled second record from the band. So this is an interesting, I think, dynamic that I always think about doing some kind of video or commentary on this concept that, everybody talks about music from Big Pink, and it's an incredible record. And this is a stronger record, right? This is a more complete record. This is a perfect record. This was obviously everything coming together in a perfect way. What's interesting though, right, is that's like the allure of the debut. That's kind of the video idea I'm focusing with, where, a lot of people are so drawn to that because it's the debut, because it's so important. And it was incredibly important, right? Like that was the record that, really kind of started this whole idea of like Americana or whatever, right? But the band, the second record here, a stronger record. So much great stuff on here. Across the Great Divide, Rag Mama Rag, The Night That Drove Old Dixie Down. Fascinating song. I always wonder, like, the whole song about the Confederacy, basically written by a bunch of Canadians. Figure that out. Whispering Pines is great. There's so much great stuff on here. And so, yeah, they're my favorite band album and one of the best self-titled records of all time. I am going in no order here. I just have a smattering of records kind of laying all over the place. And so I am just grabbing them. Actually, you know what? Right around the same time. And this is also an important record. This goes back to 1969. And it's the second record by Free. Now, I just posted a video not too long ago talking about Free's debut, Tons of Sobs. And this was the second record back in 1969. The first two Free records are by far the most difficult to find. And also you could argue like they're, some of the best. They're just great, heavy, bluesy rock and roll, late 60s. What's important about this record, though, is it really started to see, I guess, the burgeoning of the songwriting, obviously, between Paul Rodgers and actually Andy Fraser on this, which at the time of recording was only 16 years old. And so there is some absolute great stuff on here. And again, it is Free, their second record, also from 1969. Let's keep it going here. All right. Oh, let's go here. Well, this will be no surprise to anybody who knows me. This is my favorite band of all time. And this is Dream Theater's self-titled record from 2013, I believe. This was the second record they did with Mike Mangini on drums. I remember being in college when this record came out. And it's an interesting record in the sense that this does not rank too high on most people's Dream Theater sort of lists, but that doesn't mean that there's not some absolute gold on here. I've always thought Illumination Theory was one of the best epics. My favorite part of that epic is this sort of transition, this amazing string orchestral section that's in the middle that really breaks it up. But that's a great song. Along for the Ride was kind of a great power ballad for them. The False Awakening Suite was a big instrumental that kicked it off, but you also had Enigma Machine was another instrumental on here. Enemy Inside was the single. I'm never a huge fan of the singles that come out, but then you have some other stuff too that hasn't really stuck around too much. Surrender to Reason, Bigger Picture, that type of stuff. So 2013, I did see them on this tour. Like I saw them on so many tours, but yeah, Dream Theater's Self-Titled from 2013. Here's a latter career one, and a band I don't talk a whole lot about, but it's signed, so I wanted to talk about it. It is the 12th record from the Avett Brothers, titled The Avett Brothers. This came out last year. Saw them on this tour. Amazing show. This is a good album. This is a strong album. I own a lot of Avett Brothers records. They're kind of one of my favorite sort of folky Americana, alternative country, whatever you want to call them. Some great stuff. Again, it's an interesting record because you have some stuff that to me is absolute gold. I love 2020 Regret. I love We Are Loved. Cheap Coffee's great. Orion's Belt is a really great tune. But then you got some other stuff of, you know, the guys kind of crooning and pretending that they should walk around on a stage with a microphone and nothing else. That's not really my gig. Sam, Americana Sam knows what I'm talking about here. How far is yo? Kind of stuff. But yeah, the Avett Brothers. This came out last year and it was their 12th, called The Avett Brothers. Let's keep it moving here. Let's go back to 2015 with another favorite band of mine. Not sure how many people on YouTube are talking about this record, but I will, and it's the Self-Titled record from Def Leppard. You know, at this point in their career, and I would say this in 2025, the same thing I would say in 2015, you know, Def Leppard is getting their money from selling a gazillion records from some major 80s hits and from being on the touring circuit. You know, they're not known for being incredibly prolific. In fact, I think at this point, Taylor Swift has released more records than Def Leppard has. But, you know, every like 5 to 7 years, they'll put something else out. And what's always interesting too is I always feel like their singles are great. It's like good in your face, arena rock, you know, it's stadium rock, it's glammy, that type of stuff. And then the rest of the record is kind of just like, meh, whatever. In this case, the single that I thought was great is called Let's Go. It's what kicks it off. Dangerous was a kind of a great throwback jam. You had Man Enough that I understand some people like, but really it's kind of like it's almost like a homoerotic ripoff of Another One Bites the Dust, for whatever that's worth. And then you got some other kind of stuff of, you know, Vivian Campbell contributing a couple of songs and some other stuff. So, you know, not the strongest in the Def Leppard pile. And again, this to me is the typical them looking around the room and going, what do we call this one, guys? Let's call it Def Leppard. Sure thing. So there you go. Here's an interesting one. One of my favorite bands, and you would think if they're going to go out there and call something in, you know, the prime of their career, a self-titled record, that it would be better than it is. But it's honestly probably one of their worst offerings. That's not to say it's not good, just of their offerings, it's not their best. And that's the Badfinger Self-Titled. This came out in 1974, I believe. And was their first record on Warner Brothers, coming off of the Apple label. And so I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. I've always loved the cover, though, to this record. But this is not their strongest record by any means. I know there was a lot of problems going on in the studio. I think there were some wives that were involved, which is never a good thing. And there's just not a ton of great stuff. You know, my thing, I think at this point, they were just getting tired. You know, the contract that they had signed was, you know, something absurd about how many records they had to release in so many years. You know, it was just tough to find them some actual time to sit and write some great stuff. And so this record, although not bad, it just feels tired. It feels a little bit wasted. So there is that. But yeah, Badfinger, one of my absolute favorites. I still like the album, but yeah, not their best by any means. This was a kind of an obvious one, and sort of may have an asterisk by it, but it's 1975's Fleetwood Mac. So it depends on if you call, Fleetwood Mac's debut was Fleetwood Mac, but I guess maybe the technical or untechnical name for it would be Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, because, whatever, it doesn't matter. But this certainly, the idea behind this was that this was the redefining of the band after Stevie and Lindsay joined, and this would define sort of the sound that would continue on. So, of course, I'll show the 1975 Fleetwood Mac. And here's the thing with this record. Rumors gets all the love. Unpopular opinion, I like this record just as much as Rumors. I think it's just as strong. I love Rumors. I love this record. Here's my thing, and what I will never forgive Rumors for, is they didn't put Silver Springs on fucking Rumors. And that's unforgivable to me, especially because they replaced it with I Don't Want to Know. Pain in my ass. If Silver Springs is on Rumors, it's untouchable. To me, this is just as strong as Rumors. So we'll talk about it. 1975's Fleetwood Mac record. A classic. Here's more of a, we'll call it a redefining. Of course, this band had gone through all types of sound changes. By this point, this is an interesting record. We'll just go into it. 1983's Genesis. I believe this was 83. This is right when Genesis is in the 80s, when people start asking questions like, is that a Genesis song or is that a Phil Collins song? There are horns and there are drum machines. I don't know what it is. But this is an interesting record because there's obviously these, radio hits on here. That's all, that type of stuff. But then you also do have some of the proggier bits that are still on here. Home by the Sea and Second Home by the Sea. Mama is sort of like this sonic, dark, progressive pop masterpiece for me, right? And so there's some interesting stuff on here in terms of them still kind of clinging to some of that progressive style while still having some of the hits as well. Of course, after this, they would go pretty much full on, pop with Invisible Touch and We Can't Dance and all that type of stuff. But still a great record. And they had a great produced record too. So yeah, Genesis from 1983. Let's go back to another sort of interesting one that is, well, it's not really a technicality. It is what it is. It's the third record from the Velvet Underground. You probably see like a little bit of the ring wear there and some of the stuff. Unfortunately, this is not an original. It is a 1980s, I think like an 84, 85 reissue, but it's still cool to have. This is my favorite Velvet Underground album. I am not crazy about White Light, White Heat. It's just too noisy and garagey, and I'm a fan of melody and songwriting, let's put it that way, which is really where they went on this track. Now, what interestingly enough, their debut was actually called Velvet Underground and Nico, not the Velvet Underground. So this was truly the self-titled Velvet Underground here. But of course, you have Pale Blue Eyes, which was a classic. So much good stuff on here, but I absolutely love this record. Again, my favorite Velvet Underground record. No John Cale on here, so I'm sure Brian over at Embryonic is not pleased about that because he's a big Cale fan. But honestly, the absence of John Cale is probably what made this significantly more accessible, so a bunch of fat slobs like me can enjoy it a little bit more. And last and certainly not least, and here's another kind of funny one, right? Because I think people associate this with his debut record, but it's not his debut record. It's his second record, and that's Warren Zevon. His first record came out a number of years before this called Wanted Dead or Alive, and it really is not it's not an accurate depiction of his career, his sound, what he would become, etc. I love this record. Warren Zevon is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, solo artist, songwriter. My favorite song of all time comes off of this record, Desperados Under the Eaves, but obviously you have the French Inhaler that I absolutely love, Carmelita, I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, Mohammed's Radio. So many great tracks off this record. But yeah, people assume that this is his debut, not knowing that he actually released a record, Wanted Dead or Alive, several years before this, and it was several years before this. By the time this came out in, 76, he was already a little bit later in his musical career. He was the musical director for the Everly Brothers and all that other kind of stuff. So, he was not some young buck when this record came out. But, between this and Excitable Boy, I love them both. But I think I like this record a little bit more. I find myself going back to it more and more. So there you go. There are the 10. Curious to hear what you all think. Or if you have other thoughts on this, or if you haven't made a video, go ahead and do it and support our dude, our boy, our mans, Morton Estad. Great guy, great channel, all the good things. So thanks for watching, everybody. I appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next one. Cheers, y'all. Bye.